Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bhakti Fundamentals. Today we cover a most important question. What happens if we do not attain the goal of Bhakti Yoga in this very lifetime? Now, to answer this question, we will be taking a deep dive into the Bhagavad-gita, as it turns out that the Supreme Lord, Krishna, anticipated our question and answered it thoroughly within the pages of the Gita. Firstly, though, let's recall what we are aiming to accomplish via Bhakti Yoga. What is our goal in Bhakti? After all, without a defined target, anything and everything goes. There's a saying, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will get you there, as the Cheshire Cat tells Alice in the animated Alice in Wonderland movie. It's like if we had no destination while we were driving one day. No turn would be a wrong turn. Anything goes. So let's review the goal in Bhakti Yoga. The goal of Bhakti Yoga is to connect or yoke to the Supreme Lord or God via loving devotional service, which is bhakti. Yoga is a word indicating linking to the Supreme Absolute Truth, and bhakti tells us how that linking takes place via devotional service. But what will this linking to the Supreme yield? Eventually, that devotional service brings us to the platform of pure love of God. We already have an eternal loving relationship with the Supreme, and Bhakti Yoga helps us to progressively realize that already existing relationship. It's like if there's a dusty mirror in our bathroom. We cannot see our faces very well in such a mirror. However, if we clean that mirror with Windex and a paper towel, suddenly the features of our face are revealed to us. In the same way, we are presently conditioned by matter, which means that we often tend to think we're these material bodies or our material minds, and then we carry out material actions that please our material senses. In reality, we are the eternal spirit soul, and no amount of material activity, no amount of material things will ultimately and permanently fulfill us. Even if we get everything we want materially in this lifetime, we must give it up at the time of death for our bodies. Thus, it is only when we act in Bhakti Yoga to reveal our eternal, loving, and completely fulfilling relationship with God that we will also experience lasting inner fulfillment and happiness. When our practice of Bhakti Yoga leads us to uncover our pure love for the Supreme in our eternal relationship with Him, then we have achieved the goal of Bhakti Yoga. Pure love of God, or prema in Sanskrit, does not have any ulterior motives or material desires mixed into it. It is the stage at which our interests perfectly align with the Supreme Lord's interests. Such love is unadulterated, like pure gold. Here in the material world, such love is hard to come by. Our love is often conditional, based on how we're treated by someone, for instance. However, Krishna, the Supreme Lord, always has our best interest at heart, and we can trust Him unconditionally. And through our practice of Bhakti Yoga, we can ultimately love Him unconditionally as well. And according to the Gita, He will also reciprocate with the level of love we wish to exchange with Him. As they take shelter of me, He says, I reward them accordingly. Now, since prema, pure love of the Supreme, is such a high standard, in fact, the highest spiritual standard, this means we have a long way to go in our practice of Bhakti Yoga in order to achieve such a pure love. And hence, our question today. Say we begin our practice of Bhakti Yoga later in life, or even at the very end of this lifetime. Then what happens if we have not reached our goal of pure love for the Supreme yet? What if we made only a little progress? Or what if we made substantial progress, but still have not attained the goal by the end of this lifetime? Well, Krishna tells us not to worry. We're eternal, and it turns out any progress we make, no matter how small, goes with us to our next destination after this lifetime. In the Gita's 2nd chapter, Krishna himself addresses this question. In chapter 2, verse 40, he says, "In this endeavor of spiritual life, or Bhakti Yoga, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear." Now, let's turn to the purport of this verse, written by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, for some elucidation on it. Srila Prabhupada writes, "Activity in Krishna consciousness, or Bhakti Yoga, or acting for the benefit of Krishna without expectation of sense gratification, is the highest transcendental quality of work. Even a small beginning of such activity finds no impediment, nor can that small beginning be lost at any stage. Any work begun on the material plane has to be completed, otherwise the whole attempt becomes a failure. But any work begun in Krishna consciousness has a permanent effect, even though not finished. The performer of such work is therefore not at a loss, even if his work in Krishna consciousness is incomplete. 1% done in Krishna consciousness bears permanent results, so that the next beginning is from the point of 2%. Whereas in material activity, without 100% success, there is no profit. Material activities and their results end with the body, but work in Krishna consciousness carries a person again to Krishna consciousness, even after the loss of the body. At least one is sure to have a chance in the next life of being born again as a human being, either in the family of a great cultured Brahmana or in a rich aristocratic family that will give one a further chance for elevation. That is the unique quality of work done in Krishna consciousness." So what this verse and purport point to is that we carry our spiritual advancement with us from lifetime to lifetime. At no point is it ever lost. While we cannot take our material home, no matter how much we like it, or our credit cards, or even our current body with us when it's time for us to depart from them, we do take with us all of the spiritual advancement we have made in this lifetime. And this is because Krishna wants us to act on our eternal relationship with Him. He wants to revive that loving relationship with us, and therefore He ensures that we retain whatever progress we have made in that regard. Krishna makes the rules since He is the Supreme Lord, and they are very compassionate ones. Many times, Srila Prabhupada would say that if someone takes one step toward God, He takes 10 steps toward us. All it takes is one sincere step. And thus, if we're practicing Bhakti Yoga to any degree, the Lord Himself ensures that our destination is favorable to our continuing from where we left off in spiritual life previously. Now, our destination after we leave our current bodies depends on many factors. Our consciousness at the time of leaving our bodies, whether it's material or spiritual. Our karma, because our material actions in this life yield corresponding reactions that we undergo. Our desires, whether they are material or spiritual predominantly. And importantly, how much spiritual progress we have made toward attaining the goal of pure love of Krishna, or prema. Now, with this in mind, let's turn to a few verses in the Gita, wherein Krishna reassures us that those who have started their Bhakti Yoga practice never lose any of their progress. In chapter 6, verse 40, Krishna says, "A transcendentalist Bhakti Yogi engaged in spiritual activities does not meet with destruction, either in this world or in the spiritual world." And in chapter 9, verse 31, Krishna says, "O Arjuna, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes." Now, in chapter 6 of the Gita, to prove his point here, Krishna gives us even more details. He says that those who have progressed a small amount toward the goal of bhakti, those people will find themselves in a more elevated material situation in their next lives. They'll still be in the material world, but they'll be in a place where the material facilities are much grander. This is because for such people, their overarching desires are material still, but they have cultivated spiritual life to a degree. For such people, since they still have so many material desires, they achieve a material destination to carry out those material desires. However, their minute practice of bhakti ensures that their material destination will be much, much better than it currently is. Now let's look at the verse that speaks to that point. In chapter 6, verse 41, Krishna says, "Unsuccessful bhakti yogis, after many, many years of enjoyment on higher material planets where pious living entities reside, are born into a family of righteous people, or into a family of rich aristocracy." Srila Prabhupada explains further in his purport to this verse, giving us some context. He writes, "The unsuccessful yogis are divided into two classes. Those who have made very little progress, and those who have cultivated a long practice of yoga. The yogi who does not reach their goal after a short period of practice goes to the higher planets, where pious living entities are qualified to enter. After prolonged life there, one returns to this planet to receive birth in the family of a righteous Brahmana Vaishnava, or Bhakti Yogi, or in a family of aristocratic merchants." In other words, even a small amount of practice of Bhakti Yoga ensures us an auspicious destination, a higher material destination in the next life. Any amount of practice of Bhakti Yoga will only help us, will only improve our situation, whether it be material or spiritual. Granted, in spiritual life, we refine our desires more and more. In later stages of Bhakti Yoga practice, the ultimate goal of pure love of God outweighs any other material desires we may have. Now, what about those who have practiced Bhakti Yoga for a long time, but have not yet achieved pure love for Krishna, for God, by the time that they leave their bodies? For those people, Krishna says that they take their very next birth in a family of transcendentalists, in a family of people who are practicing the spiritual science of Bhakti Yoga. Why do they achieve such a birth? Because their desires are mostly spiritual in nature. They practiced Bhakti Yoga for a long time, but there are tinges of material desire left, and thus they still return to the material world. However, their situation will be conducive to their practicing Bhakti Yoga from the very beginning of life, because their family members will be on the devotional path already as well. Let's take a look at the actual verse that covers this one in the Gita. In chapter 6, verse 42, Krishna says, "Or, if unsuccessful after long practice of Bhakti Yoga, they receive their next birth in a family of transcendentalists, who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly, such a birth is rare in this world." Krishna says that such a birth in the material world is rare, wherein we are trained from the very beginning of life to begin reviving our eternal relationship with the Lord. Now, in the very next verse, Krishna explains how he helps such people in picking up in their spiritual life where they left off in their last lifetime. Krishna says in verse 43, "On taking such a birth, that rare birth we just talked about, such a person revives the divine consciousness of their previous life, and they again try to make further progress in order to achieve complete success in Bhakti Yoga. Remember that the Supreme Lord resides in the heart of every living entity as Paramatma. As Paramatma, he observes everything. Therefore, he knows what progress we have made toward reaching him, and he, from within our hearts, helps us to remember our spiritual pursuits. By placing us in a family of genuine spiritual seekers, he sets up the environment for us to pick up where we left off in our spiritual life in our previous lifetime. And then Krishna describes in the next verse that by virtue of the divine consciousness of their previous life, such a person automatically becomes attracted to the yogic principles, even without seeking them. In other words, it is actually due to our previous practice of spiritual life in previous lifetimes that we're even attracted to spiritual concepts in this lifetime. The spiritual advancement that we make from lifetime to lifetime gradually accumulates. While we may not remember our past lives and the progress we made in spiritual life during them, Krishna, the Supreme Lord or God, does remember. And then he guides us from within to remind us that we desired spiritual life before, that we desired to reach him. Thus, we find ourselves automatically attracted to spiritual pursuits again in our next lifetime. And Krishna mentions in the very next verse on screen that when such a person engages themselves with sincere endeavor in making further progress, being washed of all contaminations, then ultimately achieving perfection, they attain the supreme goal. Thus, in the end, Krishna himself arranges that we are fully successful in spiritual life. There is no real permanent failure in spiritual life if we stick to the process of Bhakti Yoga. There are only temporary setbacks. If we keep to the process of bhakti, the process itself will purify us to the point of actually revealing our eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord. This is how Krishna reciprocates with us. He ensures that the spiritual advancement we make is never lost. Thus, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain if we keep practicing Bhakti Yoga. By contrast, for those living exclusively material lives, they really do lose everything at the end of this life, in the sense that they can't take anything material from this lifetime with them, except for their material karma, which keeps them bound to the material world. As we hear in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the next level of study after the Bhagavad-gita, those who have forsaken their material occupations to engage in the devotional service of the Lord may sometimes appear unsuccessful in their practice while in an immature stage, yet there is no danger of their being unsuccessful. On the other hand, those interested only in material life, though fully engaged in occupational duties, do not gain anything. Now, we should take a lot of inspiration from this session to continue on in spiritual life. In this material world, if we don't study hard enough, we don't receive an A on an exam. But in spiritual life, the amount we study, no matter how small, is retained until we finally do receive an A. Since we are eternal beings, we are given eternal chances, but we actually have the ability to achieve full spiritual success in this very lifetime, no matter how much time we have left. So let's at least try. Now, that's all we have for today. Please let us know if you have questions or if anything was unclear, as we can address your questions in future question and answer sessions. Thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next time on Bhakti Fundamentals.